I am Elizabeth, 35 years old, and despite my successful career, family always came first. At least, that is what I believed until last Saturday. During our family reunion, surrounded by 52 relatives and friends, my mother stood up, glass raised high. She pointed at my sister, her voice clear. "This is the daughter who always loved us." The other one. She never lifted a finger. My heart stopped. For 9 years, I had paid their mortgage and bills. I smiled, walked out, and drove away. If you have ever been publicly betrayed by someone you love, drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and join me as I reveal what happened next. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant living in the constant shadow of my younger sister, Madison. From the moment she was born when I was 5 years old, the dynamic shifted. She became the golden child, the one who could do no wrong while I somehow always fell short despite my best efforts. Our childhood home in suburban Pennsylvania was comfortable but emotionally complicated. My father, Richard, worked as an accountant, and my mother, Janet, taught elementary school. They provided well materially, but emotionally, there was always an imbalance I could never quite understand as a child. "Look at how beautiful Madison's drawing is," my mother would gush, pinning another crayon masterpiece to the refrigerator. My own artwork, which I had spent hours perfecting, would be met with a cursory, "That is nice, Elizabeth," before being placed in a drawer never to be seen again. This pattern continued throughout our school years. When I brought home straight, as my parents would nod and say, "That is what we expect from you." When Madison brought home B's and C's, there would be celebrations and ice cream trips because she tried so hard. I threw myself into academics and extracurriculars, desperately seeking validation. Piano lessons, debate team, student council, advanced placement classes, I did it all. By my junior year of high school, I was sleeping 4 hours a night, running on caffeine and determination. My guidance counselor even pulled me aside once to ask if everything was okay at home. "Everything is fine," I lied, the words bitter on my tongue. What I could not articulate then was that I had internalized a profound belief my worth was tied to my achievements, and even then it would never be enough. I was building my identity on a foundation of constant striving, a hamster wheel of seeking approval that never came. The breaking point arrived when it was time to choose colleges. I had been accepted to several prestigious universities with partial scholarships. My dream was to study business and finance at the University of Pennsylvania, a path that would require student loans but would open doors in the financial sector. "Why not study education like your mother?" my father suggested during dinner. "Teachers always have job security and you could be home by 3 every day. Plus, the local state college is much more affordable." "Madison is thinking about fashion design," my mother added proudly. "She has such a creative spirit." That evening erupted into our biggest fight yet. I finally found my voice. "Why is it okay for Madison to follow her passion but not me? Why do you support her dreams but dismiss mine?" The silence that followed was deafening. My father finally spoke, his voice cold. "We are just being practical. Madison is different. She needs more encouragement." The unspoken implication hung in the air. I was supposed to be the responsible one, the one who did not need dreams or support because I was expected to just figure it out on my own. 2 months later, I packed my bags and moved into my university dorm. I had taken out student loans, applied for every scholarship possible, and lined up a part-time job at the campus bookstore. My parents drove me to campus, helped unload my things in awkward silence, and left with quick hugs and a check for $200 that barely covered my textbooks for one class. Those first years away from home were both liberating and painfully lonely. I called home weekly conversations that remained surface level and brief. During holidays, I returned to find my bedroom had been partially converted into a storage space, while Madison's room remained untouched, even though she only attended community college 30 minutes away and lived at home. "We just needed the extra space," my mother explained with a shrug when she saw my face fall at the sight of boxes stacked on my bed. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in finance and economics. My parents and Madison attended the ceremony sitting 3 rows back. They took me to lunch afterward, where the conversation centered around Madison's plans to transfer to a 4-year college the following semester. When I landed my first job at a financial consulting firm in Philadelphia, I saw an opportunity to finally earn their approval. I was making good money, more than my father at his mid-level accounting position. I rented a small but nice apartment, bought professional clothes, and started building the life I had worked so hard for. During Sunday phone calls, I would share my achievements, hoping for some recognition. "That is nice, dear," my mother would say, before changing the subject to Madison's latest boyfriend troubles or my father's golf scores. 5 years into my career, I had been promoted twice, had started building a small investment portfolio, and was finally making headway on my student loans. I believed that if I could just be successful enough, independent enough, accomplished enough, my parents would finally see me as valuable. I was still playing that childhood game of seeking validation despite being an adult who should have known better. Then came the call that would set the next 9 years of my life on a path I never anticipated, one that would eventually lead to that fateful family reunion and my mother's devastating public declaration. The phone rang at 11:30 on a Tuesday night in March 9 years ago. I was still at my desk preparing for an important client presentation the next morning. "Elizabeth," my father's voice sounded strange, tight, with an emotion I rarely heard from him. "We have a situation." Over the next 20 minutes, he explained that they were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. The recession had hit his accounting practice hard, and my mother's school district had implemented budget cuts that reduced her hours. They had been dipping into their retirement savings, but it was not enough. The bank had sent a final notice. They could lose the house within 60 days. "We would not ask if we had anywhere else to turn," he said, his pride clearly wounded. "Madison is still finishing school. She cannot help." I sat in silence for a long moment after he finished speaking. Part of me, a small hurt part that had formed during years of emotional neglect, whispered that this was not my problem. But the larger part, the one that still desperately wanted to be valued by my parents, saw an opportunity. "How much do you need?" I asked. The amount they needed to catch up on the mortgage and outstanding bills made my stomach clench. It represented almost all of my emergency savings and would mean putting my own financial goals on hold. I was still paying off student loans and had been saving for a down payment on a condo. "I will help," I said finally. "I will transfer the money tomorrow." The relief in my father's voice was palpable. "We will pay you back as soon as things turn around," he promised. That was the beginning of what would become 9 years of financial support. What started as a one-time bailout evolved into a monthly commitment when I realized their financial situation was not improving. Their mortgage was underwater. After the housing crisis, they had credit card debt I had not known about, and my father's business continued to struggle. I set up automatic transfers to cover their $2,000 monthly mortgage payment. I paid their property taxes twice a year. When their water heater broke, I paid for the replacement. When their car needed major repairs, I covered that too. The financial burden was significant, but I told myself it was temporary. To manage this additional responsibility, I restructured my entire financial life. I moved to a smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood to save $400 in monthly rent. I stopped contributing to my retirement account beyond the minimum required for company matching. I canceled my gym membership and started running in the park instead. Vacations became staycations. New clothes were purchased only when absolutely necessary for work. I took on consulting side projects, working weekends and evenings to generate extra income. My social life dwindled as I had neither time nor money for dinners out or concerts with friends. When colleagues invited me for after-work drinks, I would make excuses about prior commitments. No one in my professional or social circles knew about this arrangement. I felt too embarrassed to admit that at 30 years old, I was essentially supporting my parents financially. I worried people would judge them, or worse, judge me for being manipulated. So I kept it secret, making up stories about investment opportunities or family vacations when friends asked why I never seemed to travel or upgrade my decade-old car. The most difficult part was not the financial sacrifice, but the lack of acknowledgement. My parents never really expressed gratitude beyond the initial relief. Instead, they seemed to accept my assistance as something they were entitled to, an obligation I had as their daughter. They never asked about the impact on my own financial health or recognized the opportunities I was giving up. There were times when the arrangement felt particularly painful. Like when my mother called to excitedly tell me they were remodeling their kitchen and I later discovered I had inadvertently funded it through my mortgage payments while I was still using secondhand furniture in my apartment. Or when they took Madison on a weekend trip to New York City to celebrate her new job while I had not taken a real vacation in years. During year 3 of this arrangement, I nearly reached my breaking point. I had been passed over for a promotion that went to a colleague who had more availability for client travel, something I could not commit to with my financial obligations. That night, I sat in my apartment with a spreadsheet open, calculating exactly how much I had given my parents and what that money could have meant for my own life, a home of my own, retirement security, freedom from constant financial stress. My finger hovered over the phone, ready to call and tell them I needed to stop. But then I remembered the family photos on the walls of that house, my childhood bedroom, even if it was now partially storage, the maple tree in the backyard I had climbed as a child. I could not be responsible for them losing all of that. And deeper still, a voice whispered that maybe finally this sacrifice would earn me the love and recognition I had always craved. So I closed the spreadsheet, took a deep breath, and continued. 4 more years passed this way. I received promotions and raises that allowed me to start rebuilding my own savings while still supporting my parents. I began dating someone who did not understand why I was so hesitant to discuss future plans like buying a home together. That relationship eventually ended when I could not explain my financial situation without revealing the secret I had been keeping. By the 9th year, my parents' financial situation had somewhat improved. My father's business had stabilized, and my mother had returned to full-time teaching. Yet whenever I gently suggested scaling back my support, there was always a reason why they still needed it. Property taxes had increased, medical bills were higher than expected, the roof needed repairs. I continued paying, telling myself that family takes care of family. All the while, I nursed a hope that someday they would recognize the magnitude of what I had done for them. That recognition never came until the day of the family reunion, when my mother acknowledged my contribution in the most painful way possible by publicly denying it had ever existed. Madison and I were different from the start, like 2 plants in the same garden, receiving vastly different amounts of sunlight and water. Where I was serious and studious, Madison was carefree and social. I had my father's analytical mind and reserved nature, while Madison inherited our mother's artistic tendencies and outgoing personality. These natural differences might have been complementary in a family that valued both types of strengths equally. Instead, our parents created an environment where Madison's traits were celebrated while mine were taken for granted. "Your sister needs more support," my mother would explain whenever I questioned the obvious favoritism. "You are so independent, Elizabeth. You always figure things out on your own." This became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more I was told I was independent, the more I internalized that I should never ask for help. Meanwhile, Madison learned that her struggles would be met with assistance and her smallest achievements with lavish praise. When Madison failed her driver's test twice, our parents hired a private instructor for her. When I mentioned I was struggling with calculus, my father said, "Just work harder, you will get it." When Madison got a C on a paper, my parents would say, "At least you tried your best." When I got an A- instead of an A, the question was always, what happened to the other points? This dynamic extended beyond academics. Madison's room was redecorated 3 times during high school as her tastes changed. My room remained the same from age 12 onward. When I needed a laptop for college, I worked all summer to save for it. When Madison mentioned she might like to try photography, a new camera appeared under the Christmas tree. Despite all this, I never resented Madison herself. How could I blame her for accepting the preferential treatment our parents offered? She was simply responding to the family system as it had been constructed. I even felt protective of her in many ways, stepping into a pseudo-parental role that our parents had unconsciously assigned to me. In college, when Madison called crying about roommate drama or difficult classes, I would listen and offer advice. When she needed money for textbooks because she had spent her allowance on clothes, I would send what I could spare, even as I worked part-time jobs to cover my own expenses. After graduation, as I built my career in finance, Madison bounced between jobs in retail hospitality and eventually landed in an entry-level position at a local marketing firm. Her professional life was characterized by the same pattern I had observed in our childhood: high enthusiasm at the start of each new venture, followed by complaints about difficult bosses or unfair expectations, and eventually a reason why she needed to move on to something else. Through all of this, our parents remained her safety net. When Madison could not make rent, they covered it. When she wanted to take a month off between jobs to find herself, they supported her decision. When she totaled her car after texting while driving, they bought her a new one. I tried many times over the years to build a more adult relationship with Madison. I invited her to visit me in Philadelphia, suggested sister weekends, sent thoughtful birthday and Christmas gifts. Her responses were always enthusiastic, but ultimately noncommittal. Plans would be made and then canceled at the last minute for reasons that seemed important to her but trivial to me. When I began financially supporting our parents, I made the conscious decision not to tell Madison. Partly because my parents asked me not to, claiming they did not want her to worry, but also because I knew how it would appear from her perspective, another example of me being the perfect daughter, making her feel inadequate by comparison. What I did not anticipate was how this secret would create an even wider gulf between us. At family gatherings, Madison would casually mention the new couch our parents had bought or their weekend trip to the shore, unaware that these luxuries were indirectly funded by my sacrifice. I would sit silently, a complex mixture of hurt and resentment building inside me that I could never express. As the years passed, Madison settled into a pattern of living beyond her means while relying on our parents for periodic bailouts. She moved into an apartment she could barely afford in the trendy part of town. She leased a luxury car that consumed a disproportionate amount of her income. She posted Instagram photos from restaurants I could not justify spending money on while I was supporting 3 people. When Madison turned 30 last year, our parents threw her an elaborate surprise party at an upscale venue. I contributed $500 toward it when my mother called explaining they were a little short on the budget. I attended the party, brought a generous gift, and smiled through the speeches about what a joy Madison had been since the day she was born. 2 months later, on my 35th birthday, I received a text message from my parents and a $50 gift card to a department store. Madison forgot entirely until Facebook reminded her 3 days later, at which point she sent a belated Happy B-Day sis text with a cake emoji. The inequity was glaring, yet I continued to tell myself that family relationships should not be transactional. I was not keeping score. I was being the bigger person. I was doing what was right. In retrospect, I can see how this pattern set the stage for what would happen at the family reunion. The narrative had been established long ago. Madison was the loving, deserving daughter who needed support, while I was the cold, distant one who never gave anything back to the family. That this narrative was entirely divorced from reality seemed to matter to no one, least of all to my parents who had created and perpetuated it. The invitation arrived 3 months before the event, a cream-colored card with gold embossing announcing the 40th wedding anniversary celebration for Richard and Janet Mitchell. My parents had decided to combine their anniversary with a family reunion gathering relatives from across the country at a rented event space in our hometown. My initial reaction was mixed. I was happy they had reached this milestone and wanted to celebrate it properly. At the same time, large family gatherings had always been challenging for me, filled with questions about my personal life and career that felt more like interrogations than genuine interest. Nevertheless, I marked the date on my calendar and began making arrangements. I requested time off work, booked a hotel room since my old bedroom was no longer available to me, and started thinking about an appropriate gift. The gift was important to me. I wanted to give something meaningful that acknowledged the occasion without drawing attention to the financial support I had been providing. After much consideration, I commissioned a custom photo album chronicling their 40 years together with pictures contributed by family members and friends. It cost nearly $800 and took weeks to coordinate, but I wanted it to be special. In addition to the album, I wrote them a check for $4,000, enough for the European river cruise my mother had mentioned wanting to take someday. I knew this was excessive given how much I already gave them monthly, but I wanted this milestone to be marked with something extraordinary. 2 weeks before the event, I called my mother to confirm details and offer help with last-minute preparations. "Everything is under control," she assured me. "Madison has been such a tremendous help with the planning. She has such a good eye for these things." I swallowed my hurt at not being asked to participate in the planning, and instead asked if there was anything specific I should bring. "Just yourself, dear. And please try to be on time for once. The photographer is scheduled for 4 o'clock sharp." The implied criticism stung, especially since I had never been late to a family function in my life. If anything, I was pathologically early, a habit formed from years of trying to avoid giving my parents any reason for disappointment. The day of the reunion arrived with perfect early autumn weather. I drove the 2 hours from Philadelphia to my hometown, checking into my hotel first to change into the new dress I had bought for the occasion. I had spent more than I should have on it, a knee-length navy blue sheath that was both elegant and appropriate. I styled my hair carefully and applied makeup with precision and armor of sorts for the evening ahead. I arrived at the venue at 3:45, 15 minutes early as planned. The space was beautifully decorated with white and gold balloons, floral centerpieces, and photos of my parents throughout their marriage displayed on easels. Madison was already there directing the catering staff in a form-fitting red dress that immediately made me second-guess my more conservative choice. "Elizabeth, you made it," she exclaimed, air-kissing near my cheek. "Mom was worried you might have to work late or something." I bit back a retort about having requested this time off months ago and instead complimented her on the decorations. "Everything looks beautiful. You did an amazing job." "Thanks. It was a lot of work, but Mom and Dad deserve it." "Oh, speaking of which, can you chip in for the venue? It ended up costing more than we expected." I blinked in surprise. I thought Mom and Dad were covering the venue costs. Madison lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, they were going to, but things are tight for them right now. You know how it is. I already put in $2,000 for the catering, so I thought maybe you could handle the venue. It is $5,000 total." The irony of being asked to pay for the venue when I was already covering my parents' mortgage each month was not lost on me, but rather than create a scene, I simply nodded. "Send me the details and I will take care of it." "You are the best," Madison squeezed my arm before flitting away to adjust a flower arrangement. Guests began arriving shortly after 4. It was a mixture of extended family, my parents' friends, neighbors, and former colleagues. Some I had not seen in years. Others I barely recognized from childhood memories. I circulated through the growing crowd, engaging in small talk and deflecting the usual questions about why I was still single and whether I would ever move back to my hometown. My Aunt Sylvia cornered me by the punch bowl. "Elizabeth, darling, you look tired. Are you working too hard in that big city?" "I am fine, Aunt Sylvia, just busy with projects at work." "Such a shame you never found time to settle down and have a family," she continued, oblivious to my discomfort. "Your mother always says she wonders if she will ever have grandchildren at this rate." I extricated myself as politely as possible and sought refuge near the bar, where I ordered a glass of white wine. From this vantage point, I observed my parents making their entrance, my father in a new suit and my mother in an elegant silver dress I had never seen before. They moved through the room like minor celebrities, accepting congratulations and well wishes. I waited for an appropriate moment to approach the gift-wrapped album tucked under my arm and the envelope with the check in my clutch. When I finally reached them, my mother's greeting was cooler than I expected. "Elizabeth, there you are. I see you found the bar already." I chose to ignore the subtle dig. "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad. Everything looks wonderful." "Madison did most of it," my mother replied. "She has been here since 8 this morning setting up." "That is great. I would have been happy to help if I had known you needed it." My father patted my shoulder awkwardly. "We know how busy you are with your career." The conversation felt strained in a way I could not quite identify. There was an undercurrent of tension that seemed out of place for such a celebratory occasion. Before I could probe further, they were pulled away by other guests seeking their attention. Dinner was served at 6:30. A buffet-style meal with options that seemed chosen specifically to accommodate Madison's latest dietary preferences. I sat at a table with distant cousins who spent most of the meal discussing people and events I had no connection to occasionally, including me with explanations like, "You would not remember this, you moved away." Throughout the evening, I caught glimpses of my parents and Madison huddled in conversations that would abruptly end when I approached. Twice I overheard my name mentioned, followed by hushed tones and serious expressions. A sense of foreboding began to build, though I told myself I was being paranoid. At 8:15, my father clinked his glass to gather everyone's attention. The room quieted as he began a speech about the joy of 40 years of marriage, the blessing of family, and the legacy they hoped to leave. It was heartfelt and touching, and I felt a warmth spreading through me at his words about the importance of family bonds. Then my mother stood to speak. She thanked everyone for coming, acknowledged friends who had traveled long distances, and then turned to speak about her daughters. We have been blessed with two wonderful daughters, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. Madison, my baby who has never left our side and has been such a support to us through every challenge. She gestured toward Madison, who beamed under the attention. And Elizabeth, my mother, continued her tone, subtly shifting who has made her own way in the world. I maintained my smile, though something in her phrasing made me uneasy. What happened next would replay in my mind countless times in the days to come. My mother raised her glass, pointed directly at Madison, and with 52 pairs of eyes watching, declared, "This is the daughter who has always loved us, who has always been there when we needed her. The other one." She glanced briefly in my direction. "She has never lifted a finger for this family." The room fell silent. I felt blood rushing to my face as the public humiliation washed over me. 9 years of monthly payments, 9 years of sacrifice and support reduced to never lifted a finger. In that moment, something broke inside me, not with a crash, but with the quiet finality of ice cracking on a winter lake. The other one? She has never lifted a finger for this family. Too busy with her important job and city life to remember where she came from. My mother's words hung in the air, each one landing like a physical blow. The silence that followed lasted only seconds but felt eternal. Then came the awkward tittering of guests who did not know how to respond to such a public display of family discord. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others stared openly, hungry for drama. A few kind souls glanced at me with sympathy in their eyes. My cousin Jessica, seated at the table beside mine, audibly gasped. My Aunt Patricia murmured Janet in a tone of gentle admonishment. My father stood silent beside my mother, neither contradicting her statement nor coming to my defense. Madison looked momentarily shocked before her expression settled into something more complex, a mixture of vindication and discomfort. She had lived her entire life being told she was the favored daughter, and now that narrative was being publicly reinforced in the most dramatic way possible. As for me, time seemed to slow down. My mind raced through a kaleidoscope of thoughts and emotions. Humiliation came first, hot and suffocating, the feeling of 52 pairs of eyes witnessing my public rejection. Anger followed a surge of righteous indignation at the blatant untruth of the accusation. Then came a profound sadness as I realized that this was truly how my mother saw me, despite all evidence to the contrary. Most surprising was the clarity that cut through everything else. In that crystalline moment of truth, I saw my family dynamic with perfect vision for the first time. I understood that no amount of financial support, no sacrifice, no achievement would ever change how they perceived me. The roles had been assigned long ago: Madison, the loving daughter; Elizabeth, the cold, distant one. Facts were irrelevant to this emotional fiction they had constructed, and now believed wholeheartedly. I had two choices. I could cause a scene listing out the 9 years of financial support in excruciating detail, embarrassing my parents and shattering the family image they had so carefully cultivated. Or I could walk away with my dignity intact, understanding that this moment had given me something invaluable: the freedom to finally stop trying. The decision took less than 3 seconds. I picked up my wine glass, smiled a smile that did not reach my eyes, and raised it in a silent toast. I took a single sip, placed the glass carefully back on the table, gathered my purse, and stood. No one tried to stop me as I walked calmly toward the exit. No one called my name or asked where I was going. It was as if my departure was expected, another confirmation of their narrative about me. Of course, Elizabeth would leave. She always does. In the parking lot, the cool evening air hit my face, and I took my first deep breath in what felt like hours. My hands were steady as I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. Only then, in the privacy of my vehicle, did I allow the first tears to fall. I drove to my hotel in a state of emotional autopilot, obeying traffic signals and speed limits, while my mind processed the seismic shift that had just occurred in my life. By the time I reached the hotel parking lot, the tears had stopped, replaced by a strange, hollow feeling. In my room, I kicked off my heels and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the generic hotel artwork on the opposite wall. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Are you okay? What your mom said was not right." I did not respond. Instead, I turned off my phone completely, not ready to engage with anyone, even those who meant well. I needed this time to think, to feel, to decide what came next. I changed out of my dress and took a long, hot shower, letting the water wash away the remnants of makeup and the invisible stain of public humiliation. Afterward, I wrapped myself in the hotel bathrobe and sat by the window looking out at the town where I had grown up but no longer belonged. Sleep was out of the question. My mind replayed not just the events of the evening but the entire history of my relationship with my family. I thought about the monthly transfers, the missed opportunities, the second job I had taken for 6 months to cover their property taxes when they had fallen behind. I thought about the cruise they had taken 2 years ago, ostensibly paid for by saving up, but which had coincided with my year-end bonus that I had shared with them. Most painfully, I thought about the album sitting unwrapped in the event hall, the product of weeks of work and hundreds of dollars now abandoned alongside the check that would have funded their dream vacation. Gifts they would likely never see or acknowledge. As the night progressed, my shock and hurt began to transform into something else: resolve. By the time the first light of dawn appeared, I had made several decisions that would fundamentally change my relationship with my family moving forward. First, I would immediately stop all financial support. No more mortgage payments, no more bills, no more emergency funds. The bank account I had set up specifically for their expenses would be closed. Second, I would take a step back from all family interactions until I had processed this betrayal fully. No calls, no texts, no visits. Third, I would seek professional help to understand why I had allowed myself to be used for so long and to build healthier boundaries for the future. And finally, when I was ready, I would have one last conversation with my parents and Madison, laying out the truth in clear, unambiguous terms. Not to hurt them or seek revenge, but to finally stand in my own truth. As the sun rose fully, I felt a strange sense of peace, despite the emotional devastation of the night before. Something had ended, yes, but something else had begun my liberation from a role that had been slowly crushing me for years. I took a deep breath, turned my phone back on, and watched as notifications flooded the screen. 38 missed calls, 17 voicemails, 26 text messages. The reckoning had begun. 38 missed calls. The number glowed on my screen like an accusation. 12 from my mother, 10 from my father, 8 from Madison. The rest from various relatives who had witnessed the previous night's debacle. The voicemails ranged from my mother's initial anger. "I cannot believe you would embarrass us by walking out like that," to my father's awkward attempts at mediation. "Your mother was just emotional. You know how she gets to." Madison's confused outrage. "Everyone thinks I put Mom up to saying that thanks a lot." Not a single message contained an apology or acknowledgement of the hurt I had experienced. It was all about how my reaction had affected them, how my departure had disrupted their perfect celebration. I listened to each message once, then deleted them all. The text messages followed a similar pattern, with the addition of a few supportive notes from cousins and my Aunt Patricia, who wrote, "What happened last night was wrong. Call me if you need to talk." Instead of responding to any family members, I called my friend Natalie, the only person who knew the full extent of my financial support to my parents. We had been roommates in college, and she had witnessed the beginning of this arrangement 9 years ago. "They said what?" Natalie exclaimed after I recounted the previous night's events. "After everything you have done for them, that is beyond ungrateful, Liz. That is delusional." Her outrage was validating in a way I desperately needed. I know. I still cannot believe it happened. "So, what are you going to do now?" "I'm going to cut them off." I said the words, feeling both terrifying and liberating. Financially, emotionally, all of it. At least for a while. "Good," Natalie said firmly. "It is long overdue. Do you want me to come stay with you for a few days when you get back to Philly?" I accepted her offer gratefully. The thought of facing my empty apartment alone after this emotional earthquake was overwhelming. By noon, my parents had escalated to calling the hotel directly. The front desk called my room to inform me that my family was concerned and asking for me. I thanked the clerk and requested that no more calls be forwarded. I spent the afternoon in a strange limbo, alternating between moments of intense grief and periods of surprising clarity. I ordered room service, not having the energy to venture out where I might run into family members or old acquaintances. I extended my hotel stay for 2 more nights, giving myself time to process before returning to Philadelphia and work. That evening, a knock came at my door. I looked through the peephole to see Madison standing in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. After a moment's hesitation, I opened the door, but did not invite her in. "Mom and Dad are freaking out," she said without preamble. "Dad said you are not answering their calls." "I am not," I confirmed. "Look, I do not know what your problem is, but you need to get over yourself. You ruined their anniversary with your dramatic exit." I studied my sister's face, seeing the genuine confusion there. In her reality, I was the villain of this story. She had no idea about the financial support I had been providing, no concept of the sacrifices I had made. "Madison," I said calmly, "there is a lot you do not know about my relationship with Mom and Dad. I am not going to discuss it right now, but I need some space from all of you." "That is so typical," she scoffed. "Always thinking about yourself. Do you know how upset Mom is?" She cried all morning. The old Elizabeth would have apologized, would have rushed to comfort our mother despite being the injured party. The new Elizabeth, born in last night's moment of clarity, simply said, "I need to take care of myself right now. Please respect that." I closed the door gently but firmly, leaning against it as I heard Madison's frustrated sigh and retreating footsteps. The next 2 days passed in a blur of practical actions and emotional processing. I contacted my bank to stop the automatic transfers to my parents' account. I emailed my financial advisor to restructure my budget now that I would no longer be supporting 3 adults. I researched therapists in Philadelphia who specialized in family trauma and codependency. By the time I checked out of the hotel and began the drive back to Philadelphia, I had not directly spoken to either of my parents. This was the longest we had gone without communication in years, even counting the most distant periods of our relationship. When I arrived home, Natalie was waiting with takeout food, wine, and a fierce protectiveness that allowed me to finally break down completely. I cried until I had no tears left, purging 9 years of unacknowledged hurt and resentment. I gave them everything, I sobbed, and they still see me as the one who gives nothing. "That is their loss," Natalie said, holding my hand tightly. "And it is their delusion, not your reality." Over the next week, the calls and messages from my family continued, but decreased in frequency. My father left a voicemail saying they were concerned about the mortgage payment being late, with no mention of why I might have stopped sending money. Madison texted to say that our parents were under a lot of financial stress and asked if I was going through some kind of crisis. 3 weeks after the reunion, I finally felt strong enough to respond. I sent a brief email to both my parents. "I need some time and space to process what happened at the anniversary celebration. When I am ready, I would like to have an honest conversation about our relationship and the financial support I have provided for the past 9 years. Until then, I ask that you respect my need for distance." The response was immediate and predictable. My mother called 6 times in succession. My father sent an email with the subject line "financial misunderstanding" that began, "We have always appreciated your occasional help." I did not engage. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life without the financial and emotional drain of my family's needs. I started therapy where I began unpacking the patterns that had led me to this unhealthy dynamic. I reconnected with friends I had neglected while working extra hours to support my parents. I began exploring hobbies I had set aside as too expensive or time-consuming. 2 months after the reunion, my bank account showed the first significant increase in years. I used some of the money to book a weekend trip to Boston, something I had wanted to do but had never been able to justify while sending thousands to my parents each month. It was during this trip, sitting in a cafe overlooking the harbor, that I finally felt ready for the confrontation that needed to happen. When I returned to Philadelphia, I called my parents and suggested a meeting at a neutral location. They agreed immediately, clearly relieved that I was finally willing to talk. We met at a quiet restaurant halfway between our homes. They arrived first, already seated when I walked in. My mother looked smaller somehow, my father more gray. Madison was not there at my request. "Elizabeth," my mother began as soon as I sat down, "we have been so worried about you." "I am fine," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. "But we need to talk about what happened at the anniversary party and about the financial arrangement that has existed between us for the past 9 years. We have always appreciated your help," my father said quickly. "But characterizing it as some kind of formal arrangement is a bit much, do not you think?" I took a deep breath. "For 9 years I have paid your mortgage. I have covered your property taxes, utility bills, car repairs, and medical expenses. I have sent extra money for holidays, birthdays, and emergencies. In total, I have given you approximately $315,000. Their faces registered shock at hearing the amount stated so plainly. That cannot be right, my mother said weakly. I have records of every payment, I replied, not unkindly. The point is not to make you feel bad or to demand repayment. The point is that when you stood up at that party and said I had never lifted a finger for this family, it was not just hurtful. It was fundamentally untrue. My father looked down at his hands. We did not see it that way. How did you see it? I asked. We saw it as what family does, my mother answered. Parents help children, children help parents. Madison helps in other ways with time and emotional support. You help financially because that is easier for you. The characterization stung, but I pressed on. Did you tell Madison about my financial support? No, my father admitted. We did not want her to feel bad that she could not contribute that way. So you protected her feelings at the expense of mine. You allowed her to believe that I gave nothing to the family while she gave everything. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We never meant to hurt you, Elizabeth. But you did hurt me, deeply, and I cannot continue this arrangement or this relationship until some things change. I laid out my terms, complete transparency about my financial contributions to the family, including telling Madison the truth, family therapy to address the long-standing patterns of favoritism and emotional manipulation, and a period of reduced contact while I continued my own healing process. And if we cannot agree to these terms, my father asked, then I will need to step away from this relationship indefinitely, I said, the words painful but necessary. I love you both, but I cannot keep participating in a dynamic that causes me so much hurt. My mother began to cry in earnest. My father looked shocked, then angry, then resigned. They asked for time to think about what I had said, and I agreed. 3 days later, my father called. We have told Madison everything he said, his voice heavy. She did not take it well. She feels betrayed, says we made her the villain, in a story she did not even know was being written. I understand, I said. This is hard for everyone. We are willing to try therapy, he continued. Your mother is resistant, but she knows we might lose you otherwise. It was not the wholehearted embrace of change I had hoped for, but it was a start. We scheduled a first appointment with a family therapist for the following month, giving everyone time to process and prepare. The first session was tense and tearful. My mother vacillated between defensiveness and guilt. My father retreated into logical explanations and justifications. Madison, who had agreed to join us, sat in angry silence for most of the session before exploding, with accusations that we were all rewriting history to make her look bad. The therapist, a calm woman in her 50s, observed our dynamic with professional detachment before noting, there seems to be a great deal of pain in this family and very little honest communication. It was the understatement of the century, but it was a beginning. Over the next several months, we attended therapy sporadically. Some sessions led to breakthroughs, others to setbacks. My parents struggled to acknowledge the patterns they had created and maintained. Madison struggled with her role in a family system she had benefited from but had not designed. And I struggled too with setting boundaries that felt foreign after a lifetime of accommodation, with expressing anger that had been suppressed for decades, with building a new relationship with my family based on truth rather than roles and expectations. 6 months after the family reunion that had shattered our facade, we were still in the process of rebuilding. Not as the perfect family my parents had pretended we were, but as flawed, complex individuals trying to relate to each other with greater honesty and respect. It was messy and painful and incomplete. But it was real, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen for who I actually was, not for the role I had been assigned in our family story. 6 months have passed since that night, when my mother's words shattered the elaborate fiction I had been living in for 9 years. 6 months of therapy, boundaries, difficult conversations, and painful growth. 6 months of rebuilding not just my relationship with my family, but my relationship with myself. The journey has not been linear. There have been moments of profound connection, like when my father finally looked me in the eye during a therapy session and said, "I failed you as a parent and I am sorry." There have also been devastating setbacks, like when my mother stormed out of a session after being confronted with a particularly painful pattern of favoritism, not returning to therapy for 3 weeks. Madison and I have had our own separate journey toward understanding. After the initial shock and anger of learning about my financial support faded, she sent me a long email that began, "I do not know who I am in this family anymore." We started meeting for coffee every few weeks, just the two of us trying to build a sister relationship independent of our parents' influence. These conversations are often awkward and sometimes tense, but they are honest in a way our interactions never were before. As for my parents, our relationship has been permanently altered. The automatic transfers to their bank account remain stopped. They have had to adjust their lifestyle significantly, selling their house and moving to a smaller condo they can actually afford. My father has postponed his retirement plans. My mother has taken on additional teaching hours. I feel guilt about this sometimes, wondering if I should have found a middle ground rather than cutting off all financial support. My therapist helps me recognize this as the lingering effects of codependency, the belief that I am responsible for my parents' well-being at the expense of my own. The truth is, my parents are adults who made their own financial decisions. They chose to rely on my support rather than adjusting their lifestyle. They chose to hide this arrangement from Madison. They chose to maintain a family narrative that cast me as the distant, uncaring daughter, despite evidence to the contrary. These were their choices, not mine, and the consequences are not my burden to bear. My own life has transformed in ways I never anticipated. Without the financial drain of supporting 3 additional adults, I have been able to put a down payment on a small but charming condo in a neighborhood I love. I have started dating again this time, with the ability to be fully honest about my life circumstances. I have reconnected with old friends and made new ones, no longer limited by the constraints of extra work hours and financial stress. Most importantly, I have begun to understand my own worth outside of what I can provide to others. For so long, I believed that my value in relationships was tied to my usefulness, my sacrifices, my ability to anticipate and meet others' needs while ignoring my own. Therapy has helped me recognize this as a response to childhood emotional neglect, a survival strategy that no longer serves me. Learning to prioritize myself has been the most challenging and rewarding aspect of this journey. The first time I spent money on a purely personal pleasure, a weekend spa retreat, I was overwhelmed with anxiety and guilt. By the third such indulgence, a cooking class I had always wanted to take, the negative feelings had begun to fade, replaced by a novel sensation, joy untempered by obligation. The family dynamic continues to evolve. Last month, we attempted our first family dinner since the reunion. It was tense at times, but we managed to navigate difficult moments with the communication tools our therapist had taught us. When my mother made a comment about my new condo being extravagant, I was able to calmly respond, "I am making choices that bring me joy, and I do not need your approval for them." She looked startled but did not argue. Small victories accumulated over time. The greatest lesson I have learned through this experience is about the nature of love itself. True love is not measured by sacrifice or martyrdom. It does not require the obliteration of self to prove its worth. True love exists in balance and mutual respect, in the ability to see others and be seen in return. For years, I believed I was showing love through my financial support and silent suffering. I now understand that what I was actually doing was perpetuating a dysfunctional system that harmed everyone involved, including me. Real love required the courage to speak truth, to set boundaries, to allow natural consequences to unfold even when doing so caused temporary pain. I do not know what the future holds for my relationship with my family. There are days when the progress feels substantial and lasting, and others when old patterns reassert themselves with discouraging strength. What I do know is that I will never again compromise my own well-being to maintain a false family narrative. I will never again allow my contributions to be invisibilized or my worth to be diminished. If you are watching this and recognizing elements of your own family dynamic, please know that change is possible. It begins with telling yourself the truth about what is actually happening, not what you wish was happening or what others tell you is happening. It continues with small acts of self-respect that may feel selfish at first, but are actually essential to your healing. Remember that you cannot pour from an empty cup. Taking care of yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. Setting boundaries is not cruel, it is healthy. Speaking your truth is not disruptive, it is brave. My name is Elizabeth, I am 35 years old, and I am learning to love myself with the same devotion I once reserved for others. It is the hardest and most important work I have ever done. If my story resonated with you in any way, please share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you find the courage to stand in your truth? Subscribe to hear more stories of healing and transformation, and remember that you are not alone in your journey. Like this video if it touched your heart and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by what they give to others. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to write your own ending, whatever that may be.